My name is Bella Powell, and I am 29 years old. I stood there in my ivory lace dress, my hand over my husband Caleb's as we made the first ceremonial cut into our wedding cake. The room, bathed in the warm glow of fairy lights, was filled with the cheerful applause and laughter of our 60 guests. But as the silver knife slid through the pristine white buttercream, a cold, hollow ache spread through my chest, a void that no amount of joy could fill. Not a single member of my family was among the smiling faces. Not my mother, not my father, not my sister. The front row, the table of honor reserved for them, sat painfully, shamefully empty. As we pressed the knife down, my clutch purse, lying on the table, began to vibrate. And again. A frantic, insistent buzzing that cut through the happy noise. I knew without looking what it was. A quick glance at the screen confirmed it. A log of 36 missed calls from my mother, and a single glaring text message in all caps. Bella, a catastrophe has happened. Call me back, now. I looked up at Caleb, at his kind, worried eyes, and I smiled. It was a smile I had drilled for years in the service, the one that says, I'm fine, everything is under control, even when the world is burning down around you. If you've ever had to smile while your soul was screaming, you understand why. Tonight, something had to end. If you have ever been made to feel invisible or less than by the very people who were supposed to build you up, please show your support by hitting that like button. It means the world to me, and I'd love to know I'm not alone in this fight, so please drop a comment and let me know what city or state you're listening from right now. To understand why my own family would abandon me on my wedding day, I need to take you back to the beginning. I grew up in what looked like a perfectly normal, upper-middle-class family in Georgetown, Texas. From the outside, we were the picture of Southern respectability. My father, Donovan, was a successful estate lawyer, and my mother, Genevieve, was a prominent figure in the church community and the local country club. We were the Powells. Reputation was everything. But behind the closed doors of our pristine, two-story colonial home, I felt like an emotional orphan. My younger sister, Sarah, is 3 years my junior, but she was born wearing a crown. With her cascade of natural blonde hair, a dazzling dimpled smile, and a personality that could charm a snake out of its skin, she was the sun our family orbited. She was the star of every local theater production, the dancer, the singer. She was performance and spectacle. I, on the other hand, was quiet, disciplined, and focused. I found my purpose not on a stage, but in structure and service. My achievements were measured in honor rolls, athletic records, and eventually, a full ROTC scholarship to Texas A&M. But in my family's eyes, my successes were silent, invisible. When I graduated from officer candidate school, a grueling process that forges leaders, they sent a congratulatory card. When Sarah landed a non-speaking role in a regional commercial, they threw a party. My sacrifice was a quiet duty. Her performance was always an event. Despite all of this, a foolish part of me believed my wedding would be different. A month before the ceremony, I drove home to Texas. The house smelled of butter and toasted sugar. My mother was pulling a tray of my favorite pecan cookies from the oven, a rare gesture of affection. She took my hands, her eyes glassy with what I mistook for sincere emotion. Bella, honey, she'd said, her voice thick. I know we haven't always understood your life. The army, it's just so foreign. But this wedding, this is different. We will be there. Your father can't wait to walk you down that aisle. I'll be there to help you with your dress. Sarah will be the perfect maid of honor. I promise. That promise, warm and sweet as the cookies she offered, now tastes like ash in my mouth. The ceremony itself was the first public sign of the disaster. As I stood at the back of the chapel, the organ playing softly, a horrifying realization dawned. My father wasn't there. The officiant, a kind man named Pastor Mike, cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously from me to the empty space beside me. He leaned towards the microphone and asked the cavernous, silent church, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it stretched into an eternity of public shame. Then, from the front pew, a figure rose. General Marcus Sterling, my father-in-law, in his immaculate dress blues, his back ramrod straight. He walked down the aisle with quiet dignity, took my arm and whispered, "It would be my honor, Captain." At the reception, the contrast was a constant, twisting knife. The Sterling family enveloped me with a love so fierce and unconditional it almost brought me to tears. My new mother-in-law, Alara, a graceful woman from South Carolina, kept touching my arm and telling me I was the daughter she'd always prayed for. General Sterling held court at our table, telling stories of his time in service with a booming voice, his eyes twinkling with a pride that was clearly, astonishingly, directed at me. But the warmth only made the chill of my own family's absence more profound. Every few minutes, a well-meaning guest would approach. "And where is your wonderful family, Bella? We're so eager to meet them." Each time, the lie felt more brittle. "They had a last-minute emergency, unfortunately. They're just devastated." Each lie was a small shrapnel wound. I saw the pity in their eyes, heard the whispers. They didn't see a strong army captain. They saw a girl left at the altar by her own parents. That humiliation was a deeper wound than their absence alone. After we cut the cake, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped away into a quiet corridor, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the first ring, her voice a mangled wreck of sobs. "Bella, oh thank God, everything has just fallen apart." A cold calm, the kind you find only in the heart of a crisis, settled over me. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "It's Sarah," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Julian, he called off the engagement. He walked out, right in the middle of her engagement party. Oh, Bella, you have to come home. Your sister needs you." The sound in the hallway seemed to warp and fade. My ears were ringing. An engagement party? The truth didn't hit me like a wave. It descended like a glacier, a slow, crushing weight of ice that extinguished every last ember of foolish hope. They hadn't missed my wedding because of a catastrophe. My wedding was the event they had willingly sacrificed for a different one. They didn't just fail to show up. They chose another party. They chose the other daughter. Again. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just another disappointment. This was a declaration of war. They thought distance would protect them from the fallout. They thought I would swallow this pain like I had all the others. But they had forgotten one crucial thing about me. I am a soldier. And I never, ever retreat. That hollow ache in my chest on my wedding night wasn't new. It was a ghost I'd lived with my entire life, a constant companion forged in a household that reserved its applause for only one of its daughters. To understand the deliberate choice they made that night, you have to understand the thousands of smaller choices that came before it. My entire life has been a relentless campaign for their approval, a war I was destined to lose before I even enlisted. The pattern was set early. I still remember the afternoon I received my acceptance letter for the full ROTC scholarship to Texas A&M. It wasn't just a letter, it was the culmination of 4 years of unrelenting discipline. Countless mornings spent running drills until my lungs burned, late nights studying until the words blurred on the page, maintaining a near-perfect GPA. It was my future, earned with sweat and exhaustion. I burst through the front door, the envelope clutched in my hand like a medal. I found my mother and Sarah in the living room. Sarah was draped dramatically over the sofa, sobbing over a minor part in a play she hadn't gotten. The air was thick with her manufactured tragedy. I held out the letter, my heart pounding with a hope I should have known better than to feel. "Mom, I did it. I got the scholarship. It's a full ride." My mother took the letter, her eyes scanning it for a brief moment before she set it aside on the coffee table. She then turned her full attention back to my sister, wrapping her in a comforting hug. "You see, Sarah," she murmured, stroking her hair. "Your sister is just so lucky. Her path is so easy. But you, a true artist, you have to suffer so much for your craft." Easy? Had she ever seen me throwing up from exhaustion after a pre-dawn workout? Had she ever seen me at 3 a.m., surrounded by textbooks, fighting to stay awake with burnt coffee? To her, the tangible results of my hard work were simply luck. My sweat was invisible. My discipline was an inconvenience. My success was an easy path that somehow made Sarah's self-inflicted drama seem more profound. That dismissal echoed years later, becoming a deafening roar on the day of my officer candidate school graduation. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was the crucible. It was the moment a civilian is forged into an officer in the United States Army. Weeks before, my father had called me, his voice swelling with a convincing, counterfeit pride. "I'll be there, baby girl," he'd promised. "I'll be the first one to give you your first salute as a lieutenant." I clung to that promise like a lifeline, but then Sarah was cast in a small regional play in Austin, a community theater production. Suddenly, everything changed. "You understand, don't you, Bella?" My mother's voice was placating over the phone. "This is a huge opportunity for your sister. It's just a ceremony." Just a ceremony. 4 years of relentless effort, of pushing my body and mind to their absolute limits, of earning the right to lead soldiers, were dismissed in 4 simple words. That night, I scrolled through my phone and saw the pictures they'd posted. The entire family, beaming, flanking Sarah backstage. My father was holding a bouquet of roses for her. They looked so happy, so complete. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't even a thought. I had become a ghost in my own family's narrative. But the most painful betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was the desecration of a legacy. My grandfather, a proud Marine who had served in Vietnam, left me his most prized possession, his stamp collection. It wasn't about the monetary value. It was a tangible history of his service, a map of his sacrifices. Each stamp represented a place he had been, a piece of his life he had given to his country. He gave it to me, he said, because he knew I would understand the honor it represented. I came home on leave from my first duty station and noticed the space on the bookshelf where the collection should have been was empty. My father, Donovan, wouldn't meet my eyes. It was my mother who finally confessed, her tone defensive as if I were the one being unreasonable. Sarah had maxed out a credit card on a shopping spree in Beverly Hills, a pair of red-soled Louboutin heels and a few designer dresses she claimed she needed to build her brand. "She needs to look professional, Bella," my mother explained, as if this were a sound business investment. "Your father had to sell the stamp collection to cover the debt. You never looked at it anyway." They sold my inheritance of honor to pay for a symbol of empty materialism. They sold my grandfather's past, my past, to fund my sister's delusional future. The message was clear. My connection to a legacy of service was worth less than a pair of shoes. The final nail in the coffin came after my first deployment to Afghanistan. I had seen things, done things, that I could never fully explain. I returned home carrying a weight that I desperately needed my family to help me shoulder, even if they couldn't understand it. At a tense family dinner, I tried. I attempted to talk about my unit's mission, about the people I served with, about the burden of leadership. Sarah cut me off with a dramatic, theatrical sigh. "Oh my God, Bella, can you please not talk about all that violent stuff at the dinner table? It's such a downer. Can't you see that no one is interested?" The worst part wasn't her cruel words. It was the crushing silence that followed. My father stared down at his plate. My mother busied herself refilling a water glass. Neither of them said a word. Not to defend me, not to correct her, not even to acknowledge what had been said. Their silence was the answer. It was the confirmation I'd spent my whole life dreading. She's right. We don't care. Year after year, I accepted my place in Sarah's shadow, hoping that one day they would finally see me. But they never did. Until one day, that shadow wasn't big enough to hide the truth anymore. That was the day I met the Sterling family. The turning point didn't happen in a blaze of glory or a dramatic confrontation. It happened quietly, on a gray, drizzly morning during a long deployment in Germany. The loneliness of that tour was profound, a heavy cloak that threatened to suffocate me. My only escape was running, pounding the pavement for miles with my headphones on, trying to outrun the ghosts of my past. I started listening to podcasts to fill the silence, and one day I stumbled upon a talk by Brené Brown. I was halfway through a 5-mile run when she began quoting Theodore Roosevelt's famous the man in the arena speech. Her voice filled my ears with his century-old words. It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. I stopped running. Right there in the middle of the path, I just stopped. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The critics in the stands. My whole life, I had been living and dying by the judgment of the critics in my family's private grandstand. I had been fighting battles they refused to acknowledge, covered in the dust and sweat of my own efforts, all while desperately seeking a nod of approval from people who weren't even in the fight. I had never once given credit to myself, the woman who was actually in the arena. I sat down on the wet curb, my breath ragged, and I just wept. Not tears of sadness, but tears of a painful, liberating recognition. Those words weren't just an inspiration, they were an order. My new mission. From that day forward, I decided I was no longer fighting for their approval. I was fighting for myself. A few months after returning stateside, I met Caleb. It was at a fundraiser for the Wounded Warrior Project, an event I usually avoided. But something told me to go that night. He didn't use the typical awkward lines civilians use when they meet a soldier. He didn't ask if I'd killed anyone. He didn't thank me for my service in that rehearsed, detached way. Instead, he looked me in the eye and asked about the weight of leadership. He asked what it felt like to be responsible for other people's lives. On our third date, I took a leap of faith. I told him about my family. I braced myself for the usual, well-meaning but useless responses. I'm sure they love you in their own way. Or, family is complicated. I was prepared to build my walls back up. But Caleb didn't say any of that. He just listened, his gaze never leaving mine. When I finished, a heavy silence hung in the air. Then, he reached across the table, took my hand, and said the words that changed everything. That's not love, Bella. That's control. And what they've done to you. It's not just complicated, it's wrong. You deserve to be celebrated. The tears that spilled down my cheeks weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. It was as if a pressure valve inside my soul had finally been released. For the first time in my life, my pain wasn't just dismissed or explained away. It was seen. It was validated. Walking into his parents' home in San Antonio for the first time was terrifying. I was prepared for an interrogation, for the subtle sizing up that parents do. Instead, I found a sanctuary. General Marcus Sterling, a man whose presence filled the room, shook my hand firmly. "Welcome, Captain," he said, his voice a warm baritone. "It is an honor to have you in our home." We spent the next hour talking about tactics, leadership, and the challenges facing the modern military. He didn't talk down to me. He talked to me. He spoke my language. His wife, Alara, enveloped me in a hug that smelled of lavender and home, whispering that she prayed for soldiers like me every single night. They didn't see me as a flawed version of my sister. They didn't see a problem to be fixed. They simply saw me. Bella. Driving back to my apartment that night, I had to pull over to the side of the road because I was crying so hard. Crying because I finally understood what it felt like to be claimed by a family. And the sheer force of that realization was overwhelming. That feeling, that new and fragile sense of my own worth, was put to the test a few weeks later. My mother called, her voice dripping with the syrupy sweetness she always used when she wanted something. "Bella, darling, Sarah needs a new car. You know, something reliable to get to her auditions. Your father and I are just a little tight right now, and you have that steady army salary." The old Bella would have wired the money without a second thought, hungry for the crumb of approval it might buy. But as she spoke, I pictured the warmth of the Sterling's living room. I remembered the feeling of the general's respectful handshake and Caleb's validating words. I took a deep, steadying breath. I spoke calmly, my voice even but firm. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't help with that." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and glacial. All the fake sweetness vanished, replaced by a familiar, icy disappointment. "I can't believe how selfish you've become, Bella," she said, her voice sharp with accusation. "The military has really changed you." For the first time, I didn't try to defend myself. I simply owned the truth. Yes, Mom, it has, I replied. It taught me my own value. And for the first time in my life, I was the one who ended the call. Caleb and his family showed me what a real family looks like. And that made me realize I couldn't keep inviting saboteurs into the new home I was building for my soul. I had to set a boundary. The love I found with Caleb and the Sterlings felt like stepping out of a cold, perpetual shadow into the full warmth of the sun. It was a light so bright it threatened to blind me, and it reached its zenith on a trip we took to Washington, D.C. Caleb told me he had a surprise, leading me not to a fancy restaurant, but to the stately entrance of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial at Arlington. It's a hallowed place, a sweeping, solemn structure of glass and stone. We walked through the grand hall, surrounded by glass panels etched with the names and stories of thousands of servicewomen who had come before me. I felt a profound sense of belonging, of being part of a silent, powerful sisterhood. In the quiet heart of the memorial, with the afternoon light streaming through the inscribed glass, Caleb turned to me. He didn't say any of the cliché lines you hear in movies. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a sincerity that stripped me bare. Bella, he said, his voice quiet but steady, you have spent your entire adult life serving and protecting others. He then dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. From now on, please, let me be the one to protect you. Let me be your safe harbor, your rear guard. I don't just love you, Captain Powell. I deeply and truly admire you. The diamond on my finger wasn't just a symbol of his love, it was a medal of recognition. In that place, a monument built to honor women like me, I found the man who saw all of me and cherished every part. My heart was still soaring when I called home a few hours later, eager to share my joy. I pictured my mother's happy tears, my father's proud congratulations. The reality was a splash of ice water. Mom, I have news, I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. Caleb and I are engaged. There was a beat of silence on the other end, just long enough to feel awkward. Oh, she finally said, her voice distant, distracted. That's wonderful, dear. I'm happy for you. Before I could even describe the proposal, I heard Sarah's frantic voice in the background. Mom, I can't find my script. My audition is in an hour. My mother's attention snapped away from me instantly. Bella, honey, I have to go, she said, her voice rushed. Sarah has a huge opportunity, a callback with some big Netflix director. This could be it for her. We'll talk later, okay? And then she was gone. The entire conversation, the announcement of the most significant moment of my personal life, had lasted 45 seconds. She didn't ask about Caleb. She didn't ask about the ring. My joy, so brilliant and expansive just moments before, was snuffed out like a candle flame. The wedding planning process became a painful, living metaphor for the two worlds I inhabited. My Sterling world was filled with light. Ilara, my future mother-in-law, flew in from San Antonio for a weekend dedicated entirely to me. We went dress shopping, and when I stepped out of the dressing room in an ivory lace A-line gown, she put her hand to her heart, her eyes filling with tears. Oh, Bella, she whispered, you're a vision. She sat with me for hours, helping me with the guest list, debating the merits of roses versus peonies, her excitement as palpable and genuine as my own. My Powell world was shadow. When I called my own mother to ask her opinion on floral arrangements, her response was a sigh of weary impatience. Honey, whatever you pick will be fine, she said. I'm just swamped right now helping Sarah get ready for a red carpet event. The Sterlings treated my wedding as a momentous family occasion. My own family treated it as a minor inconvenience on their far more important social calendar. And yet, despite all the evidence, despite every lesson my heart had learned, a stubborn, foolish part of me still clung to hope. I designed the invitations myself, thick, cream-colored cardstock with elegant, dark blue calligraphy. I sent one to my parents with a handwritten note. A few days later, my mother called. Her voice, for the first time in months, sounded warm, almost remorseful. The invitation is beautiful, sweetheart. Just beautiful. There was a pause. Of course, we'll be there. Your father wouldn't miss walking his daughter down the aisle for the world. And Sarah is just thrilled to be your maid of honor. Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't know was still open. That old, familiar hope, the one I had tried so hard to kill, began to stir. I let myself believe her. I ignored the mountain of evidence to the contrary and focused on that one, fragile promise. This time will be different, I told myself. It's a wedding. They wouldn't miss this. This time, they'll choose me. It's amazing how we can see all the red flags, yet still hope for a different outcome. If you've ever found yourself in that boat, just hoping someone would finally change, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, just one word. What's the first thing you think of when you hear the word family? I hung up the phone with a smile, allowing myself to dream of a day where both my worlds could finally merge, where the light would chase away the shadows for good. That was a fatal mistake. Clinging to my mother's promise, I let myself fall into the happy chaos of final wedding preparations. For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of willful ignorance, a fragile bubble of hope I guarded with military precision. I told myself that the past was the past, that a wedding was a sacred line they wouldn't dare cross. I focused on the tangible, the seating charts spread across Caleb's dining table, the final dress fitting where Alara had cried, the endless calls confirming flowers and catering. These details felt joyful and real, solid ground under my feet. I chose to believe, with a desperation that now seems pathetic, that the light of my new life was finally strong enough to keep the shadows of my old one at bay. Then, exactly 2 weeks before I was set to walk down the aisle, that bubble didn't just pop. It was violently, irrevocably exploded. I was on my lunch break at the base, taking a rare moment to sit in my car and mindlessly scroll through Instagram. And then I saw it, a new post from Sarah. My heart didn't just sink, it seized, a painful physical clench in my chest. The photo was a professionally lit close-up of her left hand, a massive, glittering diamond on her ring finger. Her hand was held by a man I'd never seen before, his face artfully out of focus. The caption was a breathless, exclamation point-laden monologue. I said yes. Starting the next chapter with the love of my life, Julian. I am the luckiest girl in the world. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. No one had called, no one had texted. I, her only sister, was finding out about her engagement at the same moment as her thousands of online followers. But it wasn't the post itself that made the blood drain from my face. It was the first comment underneath it from my own mother's account. I am so incredibly happy for you both, my beautiful, talented girl. Can't wait to celebrate with you this weekend. This weekend. The two words blinked on my screen, nonsensical and horrifying. This weekend was my wedding weekend. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial her number. She answered with a voice full of feigned surprise and confusion. Bella, is everything okay, honey? I dispensed with the pleasantries, my voice tight, controlled, the way it gets when I'm assessing a threat. I just saw Sarah's post. And your comment. You said you're celebrating this weekend. That's my wedding day, Mom. There was a pause, followed by a theatrical gasp. Oh my goodness, is it really? My memory is just awful these days. I must have gotten my dates mixed up. I could have sworn your wedding was next weekend. Mom, I said, my voice trembling with a hot, surging rage I struggled to contain. I sent you a formal invitation. We've spoken on the phone 3 times about the date. I confirmed it in a text last week. She began to stammer, her excuses clumsy and transparent. Well, you know your sister. She's so spontaneous. This all happened so fast, and Julian's family wanted to throw them a party right away, and I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the steering wheel. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a memory lapse or a scheduling conflict. It was a choice. A deliberate choice to prioritize Sarah's impromptu celebration over my meticulously planned wedding. And then, the mask of maternal concern didn't just crack, it fell away completely, revealing the cold selfishness beneath. Her voice dropped, shifting from flustered to a tone of wheedling negotiation. Listen, Bella. Since this is all such a terrible mix-up, would you and Caleb consider pushing the wedding back, just by a week? It's just that, well, Julian is the son of a major film producer. This party is incredibly important for Sarah's career. I was speechless. The audacity of the request was a physical shock. Move my wedding. I was an active duty Army captain. My leave had been requested and approved 6 months in advance. My fiancé's family had flown in from all over the country. 60 guests had booked flights and hotels. And she was asking me to dismantle it all, to sacrifice my own monumental day for a networking opportunity. So that's a no, she asked, her voice tinged with irritation, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Well, I suppose we can try to stop by your ceremony for a little while before we have to leave for the party. Stop by. Like my wedding was a coffee date she could squeeze into her busy schedule. That request killed the last piece of hope inside me. I hung up the phone without another word, my hand trembling. The battle was over. My family had made their choice. But as the full-blown panic began to set in, a new, colder fear crept up my spine. Aria Vance, my maid of honor, my best friend since we were 5 years old, building forts out of couch cushions. The one person on this earth, besides Caleb, who knew every secret, every scar. I dialed her number, my heart pounding a frantic SOS against my ribs. Aria, do you know what's going on? Her voice on the other end was strange, distant, and carefully neutral. Hey, Bella. Yeah, I heard. It's a real mess. A mess? I pressed, a sense of dread coiling in my gut. Are you still coming? Please just tell me you're still coming. I really, really need you here. There was a hesitation. A fatal 2-second pause that told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke the words. I'm going to try. It's just, I have a sudden family thing that's come up this weekend. A family thing. The lie was so clumsy, so transparent, it was an insult. A soldier's intuition is a powerful thing. It's the feeling you get right before an ambush, the prickle on your skin that tells you something is wrong. And right then, every instinct I had honed on the training field and in the field was screaming at me. The betrayal wasn't just coming from one direction, it was a coordinated attack, and I was standing in the kill zone, completely surrounded, the night before my wedding. I sat alone in a ridiculously luxurious hotel suite, a courtesy of the Sterlings, staring at the wall. The rehearsal dinner had been a bittersweet affair. The Sterling clan was wonderful, of course, filling the room with so much love and laughter it almost felt normal. They toasted to Caleb and me, told embarrassing stories about his childhood, and welcomed me as one of their own. But every time I looked at the empty chairs reserved for my family, the laughter in my throat would die. After returning to my room, propelled by a final, desperate sliver of hope I couldn't seem to kill, I picked up my phone. I made one last call. To my father. He answered, his voice already weary. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. My own voice was small, almost pleading, a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Dad, tomorrow. Will you be there to walk me down the aisle? The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. It was filled with everything he couldn't or wouldn't say. Finally, he sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. Bella, I'm sorry. Your mother is just so stressed with Sarah's party. She needs me here. You're strong, honey. You'll be okay. He didn't say, I'm choosing Sarah. He didn't have to. I heard it in the silence. For my entire life, my strength had been my defining characteristic in their eyes. But it wasn't a compliment. It was an excuse to neglect me, to abandon me, because the strong one doesn't need support. The strong one will always be okay. The call ended, and with it, the last ember of hope died, leaving behind nothing but cold ash. My fingers moved on their own, a numb, reflexive action. I opened Instagram, and there it was. Sarah had posted a new photo an hour ago, a mirror selfie showing her preening in a shimmering emerald green cocktail dress. The caption read, "Final fitting for the big day tomorrow." But it wasn't the picture that made my heart stop beating in my chest. It was a comment beneath it from the verified account of Aria Vance, my maid of honor, my best friend. OMG, you look gorgeous. Can't wait for tomorrow. It's going to be a legendary night. The comment was punctuated by 3 red heart emojis. My world didn't just crack, it shattered, it atomized. There was no sudden family emergency. There was only a lie, a cold, calculated decision. Arya had chosen Sarah's party. She had chosen the spectacle over our friendship. My best friend, the keeper of all my secrets, the one person I thought I could count on when the world fell away, had just driven a knife straight through my back. A few minutes later, as if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new text. It was from Arya. Bella, I am so sorry. This is all just so complicated. Sarah told me you already found one of your army friends to step in as maid of honor, and I didn't want to make things awkward for you. I figured it would be less stressful for everyone if I just went to Sarah's party instead. I really hope you have a wonderful day tomorrow. I read the message once, twice, a third time. The words swam in front of my eyes, each one dripping with a cowardly, self-serving poison. No real apology, no ownership, just excuses, blame shifting, and a pathetic attempt to frame her betrayal as an act of consideration. She didn't even have the courage to call. She chose a side, and it wasn't mine. A guttural sound, something between a sob and a scream, tore from my throat. I stood up, my body trembling with a rage so pure and white-hot it felt like it would incinerate me from the inside out. I pulled my arm back and hurled my phone at the opposite wall. It hit with a sickening crack and exploded into a spiderweb of glass and plastic, sliding to the floor in a shower of dead electronics. Just like me. Broken. I slid down the wall and curled into a ball on the plush carpet, surrounded by the glittering debris of my shattered life. The tears wouldn't come. I was hollowed out, scraped clean of everything but a vast, empty numbness. Have you ever hit a moment so low that you felt completely and utterly alone, where it felt like everyone you counted on had abandoned you? If you know that feeling, please hit that like button to let me know I'm not the only one who's ever been there. And in the comments, just type the word strong if you believe that hitting rock bottom is the first step to fighting your way back up. I was done. I would call Caleb in the morning on the hotel phone, cancel the wedding. I couldn't face him. I couldn't face the pity in the Sterling's eyes or the whispers of the guests. I just wanted to disappear. It was in that moment of absolute stillness, when I had truly given up, that I heard a soft knock at the door. Room service, I thought dully. I ignored it. The knock came again, firmer this time, more insistent. An irrational spike of anger surged through my apathy. Annoyed, I dragged my broken body off the floor, ready to snarl at whoever was on the other side. I pulled the heavy door open. Standing in the hallway was Cadence Reed, my freshman year college roommate, a woman I hadn't seen or spoken to in nearly 5 years. She took one look at my tear-streaked face, my disheveled state, then glanced past me at the wreckage of my phone on the floor. A slow, knowing look crossed her face. "You look like hell, Powell," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Looks like I got here just in time." I just stared, frozen in the doorway, at the ghost from my past standing in the hallway. Cadence Reed. She stepped calmly into the room, her eyes taking in the scene with the cool assessment of a field medic. She walked over, picked up the 2 largest pieces of my shattered phone, and then looked directly at me. "I saw Arya's post. And then I saw your sister's," she said, her voice even, without a trace of pity. "I booked a red-eye flight out of Chicago an hour later. Figured you might be short a maid of honor." I finally found my voice, a weak, hoarse whisper. "Why?" "Cadence, we haven't spoken in years." She shrugged, a simple, no-nonsense gesture I remembered from our dorm room days. "Freshman year, you spent an entire semester tutoring me in chemistry when I was about to flunk out," she stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Loyalty doesn't have an expiration date, Powell." And just like that, she got to work. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She didn't force me to relive the betrayals. She simply saw the mission in front of her and executed. She swept the glittering shards of my phone into a dustpan from the housekeeping cart, called down to the front desk for a replacement, and began to impose order on my chaos. She acted as if stepping in as a last-minute maid of honor for a friend she hadn't seen in half a decade was the most normal thing in the world. Her calm competence was a lifeline in my sea of despair. Cadence opened her small suitcase, pulled out a clean set of silk pajamas, and handed them to me. "Go take a shower, Powell. You look like you need it." Her using my last name felt grounding, a callback to a time when I was just a determined cadet, not this broken thing on a hotel room floor. When I emerged from the hot steam of the shower, feeling slightly more human, she had transformed the suite. My ivory wedding dress was hanging, perfectly steamed, from a hook on the door. My shoes were placed neatly beside it. The room was tidy, the chaos contained. The navy blue bridesmaid dress meant for Arya was laid out on a chair, a vibrant symbol of betrayal. Cadence looked from the dress to me, her lips pursed. "Well," she said matter-of-factly, "that's definitely not going to fit me." She paused. "I'll handle it." Without another word, she opened her laptop, found a high-end department store with an early opening time, and booked an Uber. An hour later, she returned with a shopping bag. Inside was a simple, elegant navy dress that fit her perfectly. No drama, no complaints. Just a problem identified and solved. That single proactive act of loyalty was worth more than 1,000 empty words of comfort. It was support made tangible. The morning passed in a strange, surreal calm. As the makeup artist worked on my face, turning me into the image of a blushing bride I did not feel I was, there was a firm knock on the door. I expected Caleb, but it was General Marcus Sterling. He was dressed in his formal Army service uniform, the deep blue jacket immaculate, his chest a testament to a lifetime of service, covered in ribbons and medals that glinted in the morning light. He looked at me, his eyes kind, but with the unmistakable authority of a commander. "Captain," he said, his voice a respectful baritone that commanded attention. "Caleb told me everything. I understand you are without an escort to walk you down the aisle today." He took a steadying breath. "I would like to ask if you would grant an old soldier the honor of doing so." The tears I thought I no longer had welled in my eyes, spilling down my carefully made-up cheeks. The image of this distinguished, four-star general, a man I respected immensely, asking to stand in for the father who had abandoned me. It was a validation so profound it physically hurt. It was the respect, the honor, the paternal love I'd been starving for my entire life, being offered to me freely, without condition. When the time came and General Sterling offered me his arm, the trembling in my hands ceased. In its place was a strength that flowed from him to me, a sense of unshakable stability. We stood together behind the heavy oak doors of the chapel, waiting for the music to begin. He leaned down, his voice low and for my ears only. "Remember who you are, Bella," he said, his tone not just encouraging, but commanding. "You are a captain in the United States Army. You have faced far worse than this. You hold your head high, and you walk. This is your day." It wasn't a pep talk. It was a direct order. And every part of my being, every ounce of my training, snapped to attention. The great doors swung open, revealing the candlelit aisle and Caleb, my Caleb, waiting for me at the altar, his eyes shining with a love so pure it took my breath away. As I took that first step, I was no longer an abandoned bride. I was an officer being escorted by a brother in arms. My personal battle was about to begin, and I had my commanding officer by my side. I would not falter. I would win. The rest of the reception was a blur of pure, uncomplicated joy. For the first time that day, I felt completely present, completely safe. It was as if Cadence's arrival and the general's steadfastness had performed an exorcism. The ghosts of my past, the constant nagging feelings of inadequacy, had been banished from the celebration. They were replaced by the warm, solid reality of the family that had not just accepted me, but had proudly, fiercely chosen me. The empty table in the front row, which had been a gaping wound just hours before, was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was just an empty table in a room full of people who loved me. My family was all around me. The pinnacle of that feeling, the moment that will be forever etched in my memory, came during the father-daughter dance. As the DJ's smooth voice called my name, I felt a familiar, reflexive pang of sadness, but it was fleeting, a ghost of a ghost. Before any awkwardness could settle over the room, General Marcus Sterling rose from his seat. With the quiet dignity of a commanding officer, he walked onto the gleaming dance floor, his dress blues a stark, honorable presence, and extended his hand to me. The opening, iconic notes of Nat King Cole's Unforgettable filled the room. A song so classic and timeless, it felt like a blessing. He expertly guided me across the floor, his hold sure and steady. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer. As we swayed to the gentle rhythm, he leaned in, his voice a low, comforting rumble meant only for me. "Your birth father missed out on a hell of a moment, Captain, but I'm glad I didn't." He spun me gently, a genuine warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Welcome to the Sterling family, daughter." In the warm, steady embrace of this deeply honorable man, surrounded by the loving smiles of Caleb, Alara, and my new family, I felt a sense of peace and belonging that was more profound than any I'd ever known. I was home. It was in that perfect, crystalline moment of peace that the chaos found me. As Caleb and I stood before our guests, our hands joined over the silver knife to cut the towering wedding cake. The new phone Cadence had procured for me began to vibrate violently in my clutch on the table. It was a jarring, frantic buzz that seemed to shake the entire table. A quick glance showed my mother's name flashing on the screen, surrounded by a notification bubble that read 36 missed calls. A soldier's instinct, the one that tells you to face the incoming threat head-on rather than let it fester, took over. I had to answer. I gave Caleb a single, brief look, and he understood immediately. He placed a reassuring hand on the small of my back and followed me as I excused myself, slipping out of the reception hall into a quiet, carpeted hallway. I took a deep breath, braced for impact, and answered the call. I was immediately assaulted by a wall of sound, a chaotic mess of hysterical sobs, gasps, and frantic screams. "Bella, thank God!" my mother wailed, her voice unrecognizable. "Julian!" Julian called off the engagement. He just left. He walked out right in the middle of the party. He called Sarah in front of everyone. He called her a monster. I felt nothing. Just a cold, detached calm, as if I were observing the situation from a great height. "And how is that my concern?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It is your concern," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "It's because of you. He did it because of you. Sarah." She got emotional. She had too much champagne, and she confessed everything to him. The whole thing. Through my mother's ragged, incoherent narrative, the pieces of a sickeningly intricate puzzle began to fall into place. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a conspiracy. Sarah had intentionally, maliciously, planned her engagement party on my wedding day. It was a calculated power move, a loyalty test designed to force our parents to choose, knowing full well they would always choose her. But the deception went deeper, into a realm of psychological warfare that was truly pathological. To ensure their compliance and to paint me as the villain, Sarah had taken my parents' phones, blocked my number, and then created a fake text conversation with a contact she labeled Bella. Using the sterile, efficient military jargon she'd heard me use over the years, she had crafted messages designed to make me sound like a cold, heartless soldier who wanted nothing to do with her family. My mother tearfully recited some of them between sobs. "Mission protocols prevent civilian guests. Do not attend. Will report back post-op." Another one, she cried, said, "Your presence would be a logistical complication I cannot afford at this time." Sarah had intercepted my beautiful, handwritten invitations, hiding them away before they could ever be seen. She told our parents I was having a small military-only ceremony and that I had explicitly said I felt they would be a burden. And they believed her. Of course, they believed her. As my mother finally choked out in a moment of horrifying honesty, "We believed it because it was easier, Bella. It was easier to believe you had become some cold stranger than to face the decades of everything. It was easier to be the victims of my coldness than the architects of my pain. And Arya, my best friend?" She had been neutralized with a different, more insidious tactic. Sarah had shown her a separate set of fabricated texts, supposedly from me. In this version, Bella had explained gently that she had chosen a closer army comrade to be her maid of honor and didn't want to put Arya in an awkward position. She said you told her you would understand if she were busy. My mother relayed what Sarah had told them. Sarah told her to just come to her party instead, that it would be less awkward for everyone that way. Arya, ever the one to avoid conflict, and perhaps a little too eager to believe an easy lie that got her out of a difficult situation, had taken the out. The sheer scale of the deception, the sociopathic level of planning and manipulation. It was more than just selfishness. It was the work of a monster. I ended the call, my hand steady, my mind perfectly clear. I turned to Caleb. His handsome face was a mask of cold fury, his jaw set like granite. In his eyes, I saw my own resolve reflected. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. And tonight, after a lifetime of being buried under a mountain of lies, the truth had finally fought its way into the light. The truth was free, but the war wasn't over. He saw it too. He simply gave a firm, determined nod. We had to face them. Not as victims, but as survivors. After the last of our wedding guests had departed, leaving behind a happy, glittering trail of confetti and well wishes, Caleb and I didn't go back to our bridal suite. The adrenaline from the night's revelations was still coursing through my veins, sharp and clear. There was one final mission objective for the day. Still in my wedding dress, I sat in the passenger seat of our car as Caleb drove us through the quiet Georgetown streets to the Four Seasons Hotel where my parents were staying. I pulled out my new phone and sent a text message to my father. It was short and direct. Room 2100, 15 minutes, be there. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. When we walked into the suite, the scene was one of quiet devastation. My parents were huddled together on a plush velvet sofa, looking small and defeated. Their faces were swollen and red from crying. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. As soon as my mother saw me, she let out a fresh sob and started to rise, her arms outstretched, ready to enact a scene of tearful reunion. I held up a single hand, a gesture that was both a halt and a command. "Stop," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the emotion that had choked me for years. "Sit down. This is not a time for tears. This is a time for an after-action review." The military term hung in the air, foreign and sterile in the opulent hotel room. It stunned them into silence. They stared at me, at this woman in an ivory wedding gown, speaking with the authority of a commanding officer. For the first time in my life, I was in command of the room. I was the one setting the terms of engagement. I sat in the armchair directly opposite them, my posture perfect, my back straight. Caleb took the chair beside me, a silent, solid presence. He didn't need to say a word. His being there was everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply began my report. For 29 years, I began, my gaze fixed on them. You have engaged in a pattern of systematic emotional neglect. You have consistently prioritized the comfort and public image of one child over the well-being and happiness of the other. Your blatant favoritism did not just hurt me, it created a monster. What happened today was not a mistake. It was not an accident. It was the predictable, inevitable outcome of decades of enabling toxic behavior. I turned my head and looked directly at my father. You taught me about honor, Dad. You spoke about it, you praised it in others. But when it came time to act with honor toward your own daughter, you failed. Then I shifted my gaze to my mother. You taught me about family, Mom. You preached the importance of loyalty and showing up for each other. But you broke the very definition of the word. You broke us. My mother dissolved into a fresh wave of weeping. What can we do to fix this, Bella? She choked out, looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. We'll do anything. Anything. I looked at them, not with anger, but with the cold, hard clarity of truth. This isn't a wound that can be healed with an apology. Apologies are words. This requires action. So here are my terms, my rules of engagement going forward. I held up a finger. 1. You, along with Sarah, we'll enter into intensive family therapy, not to appease me, but because this family is fundamentally broken and has been for a very long time. You will do the work to understand the damage you have caused. I held up a second finger. 2. Sarah is to face the consequences of her actions alone. There will be no more financial bailouts, no more cushioned landings. She needs professional help for her issues, and you will no longer shield her from the reality of her behavior. Her free ride is over. My voice dropped, becoming even quieter but more resolute. And 3. Our relationship is on an indefinite pause. There will be no calls, no texts, no emails. The line of communication is now closed. If, and only if, I am ever ready to re-engage, I will be the one to initiate contact. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by my mother's ragged breaths. Then, my father, the man who had always retreated into silence, finally spoke. His voice was a raw, gravelly whisper I had never heard before. "You're right," he said, not looking at me, but at his own hands, clasped tightly in his lap. "Everything you've said, it's all true. I failed as a father. I saw Sarah's jealousy. I saw how it was twisting her, but I ignored it. It was easier to ignore it than to face it, than to face her." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was almost painful to witness. "I am so sorry, Bella. I know those words are worthless to you right now, but I have to say them." It was the most honest, unfiltered thing I'd ever heard him say. It didn't heal the 29 years of wounds. It didn't erase the humiliation of my wedding day. But it was an acknowledgement, a confession. I stood up, Caleb rising with me. "I've heard you," I said simply. "Now, we have to go." As we walked toward the door, I paused at the small coffee table. I reached into my clutch, pulled out the key to their house that I had carried for over a decade, and placed it gently on the polished wood surface. "For now," I said without turning around, "I think this door needs to be closed." It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, on my terms. We walked out, leaving them to sit in the ruins of the family they had helped to build and then allowed to be destroyed. Closing the door on my family wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. It was the decision to finally stop the bleeding. The months that followed were quiet, filled not with dramatic confrontations, but with the slow, painstaking work of building a life on my own terms. Healing, I learned, isn't a destination. It's a process. 6 months after the wedding, a handwritten letter arrived from my father. My first instinct was to throw it away, unopened. But curiosity won. Inside, there wasn't a rambling apology or a guilt-laden plea. There was just a small, neatly cut article from the Army Times, detailing a recent successful operation carried out by my old unit. Scrawled at the bottom in my father's familiar handwriting were 2 short sentences. "I'm learning. I'm proud of you." It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. I later learned from a cousin that my parents had, in fact, started therapy. My mother had begun reading books about the unique challenges of military families, trying to understand the world she had for so long dismissed. They weren't trying to erase the past. For the first time, they were trying to understand it. Sarah had also started therapy and moved to another city, a quiet attempt to start over, away from the wreckage she had created. Our relationship was still a silent, distant thing, but for the first time, it wasn't actively toxic. The door was closed, but it was no longer locked. Some relationships, however, are too broken to mend. Aria sent me long, tearful letters. I finally agreed to meet her for coffee one afternoon. She cried, admitting her cowardice, her fear of confrontation, her weakness in the face of Sarah's manipulation. I listened, and I told her that I understood how someone could be manipulated, but I couldn't forgive the betrayal. "Trust, Aria," I said, looking at her across the table, "is like a rank. It's earned in moments of pressure. And you lost yours." We parted that day without anger, but also without reconciliation. But while one friendship faded, another grew stronger. Cadence became the sister I never had. We talked every week, our bond forged not in shared history, but in a moment of absolute loyalty. Together, we decided to transform the painful legacy of my grandfather's stamp collection. Instead of mourning what was lost, we created something new. We used a portion of my and Caleb's savings to establish the Powell Sterling Scholarship Fund, a small grant dedicated to helping the daughters of veterans pursue a college education. We turned a symbol of dishonor into a legacy of opportunity. On our first anniversary, the Sterlings threw a casual backyard barbecue at their home in San Antonio. The air smelled of grilled burgers and freshly cut grass. Laughter echoed across the lawn as their family and our closest friends gathered. There were no ghosts, no empty chairs, just the easy, unconditional love of a family that felt truly mine. In the middle of the joyful chaos, Caleb took my hand, his touch warm and steady. Together, we gathered everyone's attention. "We have a little announcement to make," Caleb said, his arm wrapped securely around my waist. "It seems our little unit is about to get a new recruit." A chorus of cheers and happy exclamations erupted. General Sterling enveloped me in a bear hug, his eyes misty with tears. He clapped Caleb on the back, a proud commander and a prouder grandfather-to-be. Later that evening, as the fireflies began to dance in the twilight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Sarah. "Congratulations. You're going to be an amazing mom. You're strong and you're good. I'm sorry I ever tried to take that away from you." It was the closest she had ever come to admitting the truth of her own jealousy. It wasn't a cure, but it was an acknowledgement. A single flickering candle in a lifetime of darkness. My story ends here, but my life does not. I don't have a perfect family, but I have a healthy one. I have a husband who is my partner and my teammate. I have in-laws who are my staunchest rear guard. And I am carrying the next generation, a new beginning. My child will never have to fight to be seen. My child will never have to compete for love. They will grow up knowing, without a single doubt, that in this family unit, loyalty is non-negotiable, honor is our bedrock, and love is unconditional. My journey was never truly about seeking my family's approval. It was about learning to grant my own. It was about realizing that I was the one who was in the arena. And the only applause that ever really mattered was my own. And that, I've come to learn, is the greatest victory of all. Thank you for walking this path with me. My greatest victory wasn't about revenge. It was the quiet realization that my value was never up for debate. It was mine all along. I believe there are so many of us out there, fighting silent battles in our own arenas. If you are one of them, please hit that like button so we all know we aren't alone. For more stories that remind us of our own strength and the power to create our own dawn, make sure you subscribe to the Chosen Revenge channel. And in the comments below, I'd love for you to finish this sentence. My victory is... Let's celebrate them together.